Okay, so when we see you as a TV personality, but we talked about you are a journalist.
Yes.
What's it like when you're living in a time 6 months, a year or two ago, when we're going through not only the pandemic, but the whole George Floyd thing? Journalists are just having a field day because you're living at a time in history, not like the 80s, not like the 90s. You're at a time now when everything is changing. What's that feel like?
Yeah, well, I want to address the first part because I'm someone who I don't have news personality. I don't have personality on any of my social media. I have journalists because that's really important to me. That distinction is really important to me. I'm not a personality or a brand. I am a journalist first and foremost. And there are ethical tenets as a journalist
That's what I'm talking
that are I abide by as a professional every single day. And that's why that distinction is really important to me. Do no harm. Be a voice for the voiceless. These kinds of things are how I'm guided every single day. And so I think that's really important. I was not someone who always wanted to be an anchor. So there are some people who that is what they want to do. That's what they aspired to get to the desk. Yes. I was not someone who was always like this before this job. And Eric and I are kind of similar in that way. Eric and I, most of our careers were in the field. And so before this job, I was primarily a field reporter. And so I spent most of the pandemic and I guess the majority of the pandemic and George Floyd and social justice protests in the field. I was at the COVID testing lines. I was in the middle of protests in Orlando, which is where I was reporting before this. And I will tell you, it was an interesting time because there was also this shift in how people were consuming information. More people were watching the news than ever because people had a lot of time and a lot of information that they needed to consume or wanted to consume, but a lot of people weren't trusting of what they were seeing. You had this kind of narrative around fake news that had been obviously out there for a couple of years. I've never been shouted at or spit on more in my career than in those 2 years, at a time when, not that you ever want to be spit on,
right.
But
it was
yes.
a difficult time.
But I will say that it felt like we had even more responsibility than ever before to get it right. And it was almost this heavier weight that it felt like you always want to be accurate. You always want to get it right. But it felt even more so that every word mattered when you were covering the protests, not just for George Floyd, but, I had colleagues who were Asian journalists who felt more than ever when they were covering, Asian attacks, that every word mattered because they wanted to make sure that we wanted to make sure viewers who maybe this was the time that they were going to understand, right? Maybe this was going to be for people who were not Black. Maybe this was going to be the time that they understood social justice or racial inequality issues or inequity issues. Maybe this was going to be the point. You wanted to make sure every word was right. And so it just felt like that weight, that burden was a little bit greater. And the same thing with COVID. So much of this information was out there. You felt like you needed to get it exactly right.
One of Mike ESPN Richmond. That's where we are. Deanna Allbrittin is here with us. Mike King. We're coming to you from the ESPN studios. I just want to say a shout out and kudos to the folks over at RIC because making the talent available is always sketchy because you guys have a lot of responsibility. So I just want to give a shout out and thanks to those guys for, allowing that to happen. And shout out to my man, Eric Phillips, who's out there. He is one of the good guys. Okay.
He's a great partner.
He is a great partner. He's a good man. Okay. So let's talk about, there's a lot